Thank you very much, Jorge. It's a pleasure to be here and presenting. As Jorge mentioned, I'm going to really take quite a conceptual look at things today, but I'm going to ground that in some life history research that I've been conducting. So I would like to also add my acknowledgement and respects to elders past, present, and particularly around unceded lands, skyways and waterways. The land that I'm presenting on is the Wurundjeri, the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation in Naarm or Melbourne, and the research that I'm presenting on today was conducted on that country also. So I won't go over this. I think Jorge has given you an understanding of who I am. Most of my research is qualitative, using participatory action research and co-designed methods, and a lot of arts-based methods as well. And it's really applied research looking to improve people's lives. So as Jorge said, also I really have taken a focus around people who have what we might call complex support needs. So people where there are lots of intersections of disability, of background, of geographic location, and so on. That's sort of extended to people from refugee backgrounds. So today what I'm going to do is to give you a fairly brief overview of the life history research that I have conducted over the last couple of years, and then talk about the conceptual and theoretical frameworks that I've used really to make sense of that work. So I'll go into more detail about these issues as I go along. But just to say, I've been writing a book that's been bringing these two things together, and it'll be out for publication next year, so you can keep an eye out for that as well. So the life history research that I've conducted has involved really pretty in-depth interviews with a small number of people, 2 men with disability from Syria, and 2 mothers of sons with disability, one from Syria and one from Iraq. And the aim of the research was really to explore the refugee journeys that these people undertook and trace their experience of living with or caring for somebody with disability from their countries of origin through the transit countries that were their countries of first asylum, and then to their resettlement in Australia. So the project used a participatory action research approach. I employed a woman with disability from a Syrian background who spoke Arabic, and she conducted the interviews in Arabic, and they were then transcribed and translated into English for me to work on the translations. So each person was involved in 3 interviews, and the interviews were about 2 hours long each time. And the interviews were conducted in reverse chronological order. So we first of all spoke to people about what life was like for them now they're living in Australia. And then the second interview, we talked about them leaving their country of origin and spending time in transit. And then the third interview was about growing up in their country of origin and the outbreak of war. And this was done deliberately to really ensure that we built rapport with people through those first interviews, because we knew that the discussions that we would have with people about living in their country through war were going to be particularly emotional interviews, and they proved to be such. So it gave us time to build that rapport before really getting into that more in-depth information. So to inform and to analyse the interviews, I used Benazir and Zetta's 2015 refugee journey framing, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about that as we go. And I used both a narrative and a thematic analysis methods, and that enabled me to look at the data in a couple of different ways. And again, I'll reflect on that as we go. So, as I mentioned, there were 2 men with disability from Syrian refugee backgrounds who took part. All the names that I've given people are pseudonyms. And Dowd was a middle-aged man who had a chronic lifelong health condition, which resulted in disability. And Grigas was also middle-aged. He was deaf and he had a brain injury from an accident that he had as a child. The two mothers of sons with disability, Hannah was from Syria, and she was the mother of Tariq, who was in his late 20s and had an intellectual disability. And Amira was Iraqi and mother to Rami, who was a teenager with congenital physical impairments. So the three themes that were developed to really explain the life course experience of these participants. The first theme encapsulated participants' experiences of growing up with disability in Syria and Iraq, and there were three sub-themes. One was around experiencing limited service access and services in early life. The second was about people's experiences of being included within their communities as children and young adults. And the third was around their experiences of exclusion and discrimination, again, within the broader community. The second theme related to their experiences of fleeing war and seeking refuge. And here people told me often in great detail about their experiences of living through war and of escaping that war and about seeking refuge in a transit country. And the third theme there was around their resettling in Australia. For both of the men, they spoke about seeking not particularly successfully employment in Australia, despite having both been employed in both Syria and the transit country. The woman, the mothers who I interviewed spoke about being a carer in a new country and really some of the difficulties as well as some of the positives around that as well. The third theme was around all four people, about their access and using services, and particularly disability services was a focus. And then the fourth theme in the Resettling in Australia theme was around belonging and inclusion. So how people felt they were, their sense of belonging and inclusion within the Australian society. So as I mentioned, in describing these themes and experiences, I've drawn on four conceptual theories. And the first of these theories is life course theory, which was first proposed by American sociologist Glenn Elder. The second, perhaps more familiar to people, is ecological theory, which was developed by educationalist Yuri Bronfenbrenner about 40 years ago. The third is social capital theory, which people may well be familiar with as well. And the fourth is, as I previously mentioned, that journey framing theory, which was developed by Benazir and Zeta in about 2015, or they published it then. So these four theoretical frameworks offer complementary viewpoints to understand the experiences of people with disability from refugee backgrounds. And I'm going to describe each of these theoretical conceptual frameworks in relation to those life history interviews, which I just explained to you. So Professor Glenn Elder developed life course theory in the 1970s to describe how living through the Great Depression of the 1930s and the Second World War influenced the lives of a generation. Elder proposed 5 intersecting life course principles. So the first, represented by that line at the bottom of the diagram, was about lifespan development. And Elder said that, the experiences that people have throughout their life then impact on their development as individuals and their subsequent life experiences. So we're all, a product of of where we live and how we live, I guess. The second principle up there in the circular diagram is historical time. And that demonstrates how global, national, and subsequent and individual events, which an individual experiences during their life course, will impact on them. And as I said, his focus was around people who'd lived through the 1930s and the 1940s. But his work really is timeless. The third principle then was around social time and place. And here Elder talked about the fact that the timing of your birth and your and life and where you're born and live impacts on your experiences as well. The fourth principle is linked lives, and that's the fact that people who are important in a person's life impact what happens to them and really reflects the interrelationships between people. And the fifth principle is human agency, and that's the fact that people make choices. So even though we are a product of where we're born and the time we're born and the relationships that we have, we still have the opportunity to make choices and make changes and shift what happens in our lives. So understanding how these interrelated factors influence a person's life really allow us to explore and explain individuals' life experiences within a larger context of history, place, time, and relationships. And taking this life course approach provides a holistic understanding of lives over time and across changing social contexts. And I found this a really useful framing when thinking about the journeys that people with disability have made as refugees. And I'll explain how this all comes together as we go. So the second theory then, as I said, probably a lot more familiar to people, is Urie Bronfenbrenner's ecological theory, developed over 40 years ago now, to explain how the individual or micro, the meso, the exo, and the macro systems impacted on child development in his case. But it's been used a lot more broadly than that across health, across disability, across education, and so on. So I really find this a useful construct to describe and interrogate the intersection of individual and broader social influences. The theory explains the interaction between the micro-individual level, that meso level, which connects the individual to the services and the system structures with which they have direct contact, the exosystem, which is the broader social system, which influences the way the individual may not be directly engaged in by the individual, but how those broader systems influence them. And the macro system, which comprises the outermost level of influence and includes cultural values, customs, laws, and regulations. So the ecological theory describes a series of nested and interdependent systems. Social capital theory was described by American sociologist Nan Lin, proposing that social connections and relationships are critical for individuals, social groups, organisations, and communities to achieve goals. And three types of social capital are proposed: bonding, bridging, and linking. So bonding networks are non-hierarchical and involve well-known and trusted members who provide direct assistance to an individual. Also considered to be non-hierarchical, bridging networks reflect the connections made with a broader network, who the person is typically connected with by members of their bonding network. Given the relationship with the referring network member, there's still a degree of trust and familiarity within a bridging network. Linking networks, on the other hand, are described as hierarchical, involving connections with people and structures outside the person's known and trusted contacts. And finally, journey framing theory proposes that exile and forced migration is a process and journey comprising the why, how, and where of what is often a series of life-changing experiences. So Benazir and Zetta's work notably identified 4 conceptual challenges in understanding refugee journeys. the characteristics of what they call the wayfarers. So these are both individual and group demographic characteristics. Temporal characteristics, which they describe as when the person themselves thinks that their journey was considered to start and to end. And often those journeys start long before people actually leave the country and go on for much longer than just arriving and getting settled in a new country. Drivers and destinations are about the reasons and motivations for the journey. So what is it that really impels people to leave their country of origin? And then there are a whole range of issues around the process and content of the journey. So what happened during a person's refugee journey? So again, all of these influences compound. So in my life history research with people with disability and family members from refugee backgrounds, I've brought these 4 theories together to really help me gain a deeper understanding of how the refugee journey has impacted people's lives. And this figure depicts elements of the 4 theories within a representation of Bronfenbrenner's ecological model to situate the individual with a disability, their family and friends at that central micro level within the meso services and network level, the broader exo system level, and the macro geopolitical environment level. So if we start looking at that innermost, the purple circle there, this figure incorporates what Benazir and Zeta described as the characteristics of the wayfarers, which would include things like intersections of age and gender, disability, country of origin, relationship status, religious affiliation, minority status, and so on. Lots and lots of characteristics there. This inner circle also corresponds with what Elder describes as linked lives, highlighting the interdependency of family relationships with families, friends, and colleagues across the life course. And human agency is also at this micro level, representing the choices that people make. And we might think that people who are refugees don't have a lot of choice in what happens to them as part of that journey. But in fact, this life history research, and I'm sure your knowledge of people, shows that people are constantly making choices about whether they leave, when they leave, who goes with them, who they leave behind, what they leave behind. So agency is a big part of that journey. The next, the yellow layer of the ecological model, the meso level, depicts the connection between those in the inner circle and the broader services and networks with which an individual and their inner circle interact via bridging networks, which may be accessed through a person's micro level contacts. So many of the people who come to Australia, and certainly the people who I interviewed for the life history interviews, all had relatives already living in Australia, and those people provided them with really important links into other networks. The third, the green circle, represents the exo or broader system level with which an individual might not feel that they interact directly, but which nonetheless has an impact on their life. And that would be things like the education system, the employment sector, the disability sector, and so on. And the fourth orange outer circle represents the macro level or geopolitical environment. And obviously for people who have come as refugees, that's their refugee journey has been very much informed by what's been happening at the geopolitical level. So I'm going to describe each of these layers with reference to the life history interviews. So all 4 theories that I've used here highlight the interdependent nature of people's lives. the network of shared relationships that's fundamental to people's survival and thriving, especially through times of war and relocation. And Elder, as I said, referred to this as the principle of linked lives. As depicted on the previous slide, Bronfenbrenner situated individual and family connections at that central micro-ecological level, and it was foundational to all the other levels. Relationships are integral to bonding and bridging networks in the development of social capital, and Benazir and Zeta described the wayfarer's characteristics, including interrelationships between wayfarers, as central to understanding the refugee journey. So let's take an example from those life history interviews that I mentioned to you earlier. So Tariq is in his late 20s. He has an intellectual disability. His mother, who we interviewed, Hannah, is his main carer within his family, and the family comprised Tariq's father and 2 brothers. Tariq has been dependent on this family, and Hannah in particular, to take care of him throughout his life. Looking after Tariq, as well as ensuring his brothers had educational and work opportunities, was a driving force in the family leaving Syria and coming to Australia. In Syria, Hannah reported that Tariq had strong connections with their neighbours and extended family, who would look out for him and include him in activities. These connections are part of bonding networks and are indicative of the ways in which people's lives are linked, as described by Elder. At the meso level, bridging social capital networks are important, ensuring the person knows about and has access to services and supports beyond their immediate connections. So this is particularly important when a person with disability and their family come from a refugee background to settle in a new country, thereby losing their former understanding of and connections to people and services in their country of origin. In this situation, the whole family, that is all those in that inner circle, may be starting from scratch in developing new networks and may rely on a broader circle of extended family and acquaintances to introduce them to new services and supports and networks. Again, reflective of Elder's principle of linked lives. So to continue the example of Hannah and Tariq, since coming to Australia about 8 years ago, Tariq had lived a pretty sheltered life with just his family, until one day Hannah and Tariq, by chance, met a woman on the street who spoke Arabic, and learning that Tariq had no paid supports, helped Hannah to register him for the NDIS. Tariq now receives speech pathology, is learning to use an iPad to communicate, and as someone who takes him out into the community, which has given Hannah a break. So this is indicative of developing new and broader networks, providing additional knowledge of and access to services. The exo level relates to the broader systems within which the individual and their meso connections operate within. This could, for example, be a funding body providing financial support for a service provider used by an individual. In this example, how a funding body's guidelines account for the intersections of age, cultural background, language, gender, religion, etc., can have a huge impact on the quality of the support then provided to the individual by that service provider. It is at this level that linking networks can be influential in, for example, providing advocacy for equitable service delivery and funding models. So given the importance of for people with disability and family members from refugee backgrounds to connect to services, this level also aligns with Benazir and Zeta's process and content elements of the refugee journey. So another example from the life history research is the attempts by both Dowd and Grigas to get employment since coming to Australia. Both men had worked all their lives in Syria and in their countries of first asylum, where they had spent time prior to coming to Australia. But since arriving in Australia, both had struggled to find work, sufficient work, and work they wanted to do. Through contacts of his relatives in Australia, Grigas had been able to get part-time manual work, but as he gets older, he's finding this hard. The intersection of his deafness and brain injury, his lack of Auslan, which is Australian Sign Language, and his refugee background have all made it harder. Nonetheless, Grigas has connected with the deaf community in Australia and also members of his religious faith, and these links have provided him with broader community contacts. The final level then, the macro level, involves national and global human rights, disability, refugee and settlement policy, for example, the 1948 Universal Declaration on Human Rights, the 2006 United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and the 1951 Convention relating to the status of refugees and its 1967 protocol. So while not seemingly having a direct impact on the lives of people with disability and family members from refugee backgrounds, these instruments are actually foundational in ensuring people seeking asylum, including those with disability, are treated fairly and humanely. These instruments are therefore a fundamental underpinning of refugee journeys, drivers and destinations, providing people seeking asylum with some level of assurance that there is an internationally recognised and agreed upon process responsive to their personal journeys. We all know it's not perfect, but there is a system. So this level also aligns with Elder's principle of time and place, as historical events such as these global responses to war and conflict in various parts of the world undoubtedly impact on the lives of individuals. An example from the life history research is the situation of Amira and her son Rami, who's now a teenager. When Rami was born in Iraq about 16 years ago, the unstable circumstances in the country at that time meant that he likely did not receive the best possible care for his physical impairments with which he was born. Amira and the family also did not receive support to manage Rami's physical and psychological needs. The war meant that Amira's parents and siblings were scattered to live all over the world, removing her from the supports that she received from her mother and sister in particular while living in Iraq. So global events then had a profound and long-lasting impact on Amira and Rami's lives. So in conclusion, applying these four theoretical frameworks to the experiences of people with disability from refugee backgrounds across their life course provides a conceptual understanding of people's experiences and the impact of these experiences throughout their refugee journeys. These life history interviews revealed the refugee journey as long and complex, with people with disability and family members experiencing ongoing marginalisation and discrimination that is exacerbated by war. There is no doubt, therefore, that people from refugee backgrounds with disability require specialised support and services in their resettlement country, and also that we need more research to fully understand people's experiences and how best to support them throughout their refugee journey. So this body of research, which we've conducted in partnership with refugee and disability services and people with disability and family members from Syrian and Iraqi refugee backgrounds, spanned over 7 years now, and it's some of the first in the world to explore the challenges and benefits experienced by this group in their journeys to and settlement in Australia. So thank you very much.